Good morning. Good morning. It is Friday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are live and we're going to talk about some real estate. Really excited. My brother is joining us today, so he should be on any minute. And he can answer any of the financial questions that I never can. So that'll be pretty exciting. Good morning, Franklin. You were on early. Oh, here he is. Hey, Will. Trying to figure out which one looks better. You might have to slide over if you go with this one. Can you hear me okay? Uh-oh. I can't hear you. Cameron Bennett, good morning, man. I'm sure you're aware, but you asked the awesome question last week, and I also learned how to download the video footage from here, from these live streams, and take little excerpts of good questions that were asked and repost those. So now I've got a lot of live streams I can go back through and find the good questions that, and hopefully post like a more concise version of this for all the people that do not tune into these live streams for one reason or another. No, Will, I still can't hear you.
All right. Hey, how about now?
Oh, yep. There we go.
Nice. We're in business.
Oh, yeah. Let me see if there's another background that I could choose other than my face. There we go. That's fun. I'm going to see if I can. No. Good morning. Good morning. So, any questions that you guys might have, feel free to go ahead and post those in the chat. Let me get that disclaimer up here as well, just so you guys know that we're not too serious. You should always get professional advice. Well, how's everything with you going, Will?
Yeah, everything's been going great. So, just steadily working on refinances.
Mm-hmm. Let's see.
Yeah, we're in the Christmas season now, so I've been going to Christmas parties here and there, school plays. Got all kinds of things going on.
Nice. Do you pull permits to check the work previously done on the houses you buy? No, we're learning about this at the moment. We just made a little mistake that we're working our way through now. But for the most part, where we are, permits really aren't required to be pulled. I think if we were, I know we've got a friend in New Jersey, and he told me the other day that if they even want to change out the water heater, they have to pull permits in order to do that. And fortunately, that's not the case here in Dayton, Ohio. We have very little to do with permits. Um, the only times that permits are required that I'm aware of are when you are messing around with like the structural integrity of a property. Um, so any like big foundational issues, and then if the property has been vacant for a while and the gas companies or the electric company, if the utilities have been off for quite some time, they will want you to pull a permit, have like a licensed electrician or plumber out there to make sure that the gas lines are able to hold pressure so that they don't have any leaks in them. And then they're going to want to make sure that all the electric is, all the exposed electric is up to code and the service is good. So those are the only two times that we run into permits. So consequently, there's really not much of a reason for us to pull permits to see if work was done appropriately, because how little permits are required, it wouldn't give us too much insight on the property. You have anything to add on that one, Will?
Yeah, I think it's crazy you'd have to pull a permit for a water heater.
Hey, good thing we don't live in New Jersey, huh?
Yeah.
I'm trying to make you a little bit more comfortable here. I'm working on getting a better background for us. Steve, I'm guessing, ex Steve. I want to use commercial loans to buy real estate, but the balloon scares me. Are you using commercial loans? If so, what advice would you give there? Man, that's exciting, Will. That's right up your alley.
Yeah, so we use commercial loans. The ones that we have do not have balloons in them. That's a fun background.
Yeah, now you feel like you're home.
Yeah. Yeah. So Steve, I would ask what kind of a commercial loan you're getting. Is it single family residential that's packaged together? Is it an actual commercial property? I mean, there's is it some sort of a business that you're buying? Because those would all play into it.
Yeah, and as far as balloons go, we don't. We've got a couple of balloons. We have balloons on almost all the private mortgages that we have. We generally write just in contract like a 2 to 3 year balloon. How about those commercial loans? Do we have balloons on those, 5 or 10 year?
No. So we've got two decent sized commercial loans right now. We did one through a bank, and they gave us to 20 amortized over 20 years. And there's no balloons. The rate just readjusts every 5 years to whatever the market rate is at the time. So, and then the other one, it's a 30-year fixed, but no balloon there either. It's interest only for the first 10 years and then amortized over the next 20. Yeah, so single family residential package together. You shouldn't, you could find a lender with no balloon on that because that's what we've done. Hey, Ryan, can you put my email up there? And Steve, you can email me and we'll work together to figure it out.
Yep. I should be able to do that. You have a ATM email?
You can just do the Ingram Capital one.
There you go. 1L. 1L
Yeah.
and Will.
Yeah, I like to keep people on their toes.
All right. And I think just going back to this really quick, where did he go? Ex Steve, single family residential packed together. And then just like the banking question in general. I think, Will does so much that never really makes it on this channel. But one of the things I feel like we can't emphasize enough, and one of our biggest hurdles is just finding lenders willing to work with this type of business model. So just as often as I'm looking for properties, I feel like Will was out there looking for banks. I mean, I feel like almost every day when we talk, you're making additional banking connections. So I think
Yeah.
you get shot down at a couple of banks, or they say that you have to take balloons. I would just keep on working and keep on looking for new banks.
Yeah. And to find a bank that does a commercial loan without a balloon, I mean, you might have to call 20 banks. You might have to find a local broker that knows where to find the ones without balloons. And I mean, even if the balloon is, it might be 10 years down the road, which might be acceptable to you, because that gives you 10 years to figure out how to solve this problem.
Yeah. All right. Good morning, Ryan and Will. I wanted to know, when you first started investing, how did you evaluate the market? Was it all independent, or did you use a realtor? Well, when it comes to our properties here in Dayton, I would say one of the first things that I did that I think is one of the best moves is I got really plugged in with some other real estate investors in the area. Now, when we bought our first property, it was a duplex, and my wife went to Wright State University, and when she was in college, she lived just like a couple of doors down from this first duplex that we purchased. So that was one of the driving factors in making us feel comfortable with the purchase. We used a realtor for that transaction. However, one of the things that realtors are not allowed to comment on, which is counterintuitive and very like unhelpful, is like what types of areas it's in. They're not really allowed to say one way or another. So I would say it's a lot more helpful to find like a group of other real estate investors that are legally allowed to speak candidly about areas, the pros and cons of each, and the corresponding rates of returns. So after that first duplex, I mean, ultimately, that's one of the only properties that we have in that area. I'm not a fan of that area very very much. Um, but after that, I would say I did a lot of driving around. I did a lot of speculating, and spoke with a lot of real estate investors that had decent sized portfolios. And just over lunch and coffee and hours long meetings, just discuss like the pros and cons of the areas and why they were investing, why they avoid certain areas, and just getting a feel and then formulating our own personal preference towards it. Also, I mean, that first duplex, it's not in a bad spot. I think one of the biggest issues that we have in renting that place out is just the way that the building is, because it's a duplex, but it's one of the top bottom ones, and I think any duplex that we ever purchase from here on out will be a side by side. So living on top of people like that is just kind of tough. That's a tall order for anyone, I feel like. You have any thoughts on that, Will?
Yeah, I mean that's all good thoughts. And when you're first getting started in something, it's always best to have some good advice. So they need to think about who to surround yourself with to help you get that start. So, and then after you get in, learn the ropes, then you can make some adjustments.
Yeah, I like that. All right, Cameron Bennett. Did finding lenders become difficult after the first 10 properties? What did the terms look like?
I would say so. Um, I mean, we only did a couple of Fannie Freddie loans, which I'm assuming that's why you're asking that question, because Fannie and Freddie, they're the loans that most typical banks will do. All these loans get packaged up and sold off to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And there's a limit. It used to be 10, but I think it's 12 now of how many houses you can have in your personal name with mortgages backed by Fannie and Freddie. So you can find lenders that you just have to find lenders that go outside of that box, that either have the loans on private terms, like using private money, not government money, or banks willing to hold the note themselves. But yeah, we work with lenders that it's all based on the property, not really us. So, well, it's based on our track record, our credit score, and then the property, not our personal income.
I think this is probably one of the largest misconceptions when people are just getting started and learn about like single family homes. And I think a lot of people, just like on surface level, believe that they're limited to only having 10 properties. Um,
Correct.
I know it's a good strategy to get Fannie Freddie loans, but I know that we don't even have ours maxed out. So when would you recommend that people use the Fannie Freddie strategy versus just going into the commercial on the commercial side, or that
I mean,
portfolio loan you're mentioning?
Fannie Freddie's great to get your start. So if you get 5, 6 houses in your name, you figure out what you're doing, you get the track record. And then Fannie Freddie, what we mean by that is those are the terms that look like a 30-year fixed. Right now, interest rates on an investment property, depending on your credit score and the loan amount, would probably be in the mid threes, low fours, somewhere in there. So yeah, I would do 5 or 6 in your personal name using that type of route, and then switch after that.
Yeah, I think especially right now, I mean, with those low interest rates, if you can lock those up for 30 years pretty quickly, then I think that's a strong position to be in.
Yeah, so the interest rate there would be about 1% to 1.5% lower than if you went the commercial route. And all a commercial loan means is just somebody that it's private money, or a bank is holding it on their books, and you could take title in the LLC name instead of your personal name.
Steve says, thanks. Thank you, Steve. I think those are good questions. Lewis Porter Jr. Yeah, PropStream. So if you haven't already, feel free to click this link for PropStream. I need to go ahead and put that and pin it in the comments as well. Good job, Lewis Porter Jr. Thanks for helping me out there. And then, Will, any thoughts on buying in St. Augustine?
I mean, St. Augustine is about 2 cities south of where I live. It's about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on which part you're going to. I don't spend a whole lot of time there. It's an awesome city, but I don't pay much attention to the real estate market there, just because, I mean, we don't invest there. I can tell you that in Jacksonville, prices have gone up quite a bit over the past year and a half to 2 years. We got about 100 people a day moving here right now, which is driving the prices up even more. And I mean, St. Augustine's a really cool older city, and some of the on the northwest quadrant of it, they're doing a lot of newer construction. So there's tons of families moving to St. Johns County, which is where St. Augustine's in. And I believe it's one of the fastest growing in Florida because they've got good schools. There's tons of families moving to. So, yeah, I mean, I think for appreciation, it might be a pretty good investment. I'm not sure what cash flow would look like. And you might have to have some decent money to put down. I don't know how well you'd be able to find discounted properties, but St. Augustine's been around for a while, so there might be a section with some older homes that you can get discounted.
And we've run the numbers several times, and we're still to the point where Dayton comes out ahead, because I think St. Augustine was where you looked at that package of homes, right?
Yeah, I looked at a package of houses. There's some guy listed it. It was like 11 or 12 houses together. I can't remember the purchase price. Somewhere around like $1.5 million. But none of them were houses that you would want to live in, or that you could imagine people actually living in. Like, most of them were a house tucked away in somebody else's backyard, that kind of situation. Or, the house right off the side of the road, like a major road that is like, man, somebody should have torn this house down. Like, this should have been bought by the city and used for this street. Instead, there's a house right here.
Mm-hmm.
So
now this is funny. Lewis Porter Jr. says you're the anti-Ryan in regards to the hair. That's funny.
Yeah. I was in the Navy for a little while, so.
Yeah. What type of corporate entity do you prefer for real estate? I think LLC makes sense. It really depends on what your end goal is. Some people say that you should have, and this really comes down to like personal preference and risk tolerance, but I would say, LLC is plenty as far as that goes. And then some people have differing opinions on, should you have one property per LLC, or should you have all properties in one LLC? And there's no real right answer. So I think if you have the right corporate structure and an appropriate amount of insurance, you'll be okay for 90% of the circumstances. But CPAs, attorneys, I mean, getting with them and looking at your specific situation is probably the best and safest bet. What type of banks are more likely to lend on their own capital?
That's a good question. So I would say the smaller local credit unions would do that. Not the national banks. National banks can be tough to work with on an individual level. So yeah, I would just go with your local credit unions or your local banks, and just realize you might have to talk to 15 of them to find somebody that would work with you. So their titles are typically something like VP of Commercial Lending is the person that you want to find at the bank.
Yeah. When the bank gets small enough, everybody's a VP.
Yeah.
I think there's also some well, no. Yeah, I think you're right. To keep it in-house kind of indefinitely, I think the smaller credit unions or the regional banks are best. And then, because I mean, the kind of the long-term hard money type people, they just resell on the secondary market.
Yeah, so I mean that's a good point too. Is most of these smaller banks and credit unions, like Ryan and I went and got 3 or 4 loans from one of them, and then they'd cut us off. We'd have to go to the next credit union. We'd get another 3 or 4 loans from them, and then they would say, "All right, you guys have met your risk tolerance with us," and we'd have to move on to another one. And then we eventually found a company like Ryan's talking about that they just originate the loans and then they package them off and sell them to one of the bigger companies out there. So that's working pretty well for us right now.
Mm-hmm. Let's see here. Before we answer this one, I'm going to go ahead and post this real quick, just so we don't run out of questions. If you've got any questions at all, feel free to post those in the chat. And I've successfully pinned the message that has the link to your free 7-day trial of PropStream. And we use PropStream to analyze all of our deals. It gives you just the complete control over running your own comps. So you're able to go through, look at photos of the other properties that have sold in the area, and you're able to pick out based on square footage, year built, whatever you really want to justify why it's a good comp for you. And it spits out a really good looking report, a comp report that you're able to then present to your private mortgage lenders or banks or the appraiser to say, hey, I'd like to make your job easier. This is what I am thinking, and here are the comps that I'm basing that off of. That way, you're not just trying to, strong arm the appraiser into giving you whatever number that you ask for. You're able to come armed with answers. All right. If the terms include first year interest only, is it possible to pay it off sooner by making more payments bi-weekly, for example?
You might be able to make principal pay down is what you're talking about. But another question is, why would you do that? Because it's a lot of hard work to get this debt, this long-term debt. And would your money that you'd be using, your cash on hand to pay that down, would that be better put elsewhere, like in reserves, in case things go wrong with your houses, set aside to buy more houses, or use it to lend out to other people, get a return on your investment that way? Any of those might be better than, because right now the interest rates are going to be somewhere around 4.5% to 5.5%, just depending on your deal.
Yeah, and I would say as well that it really depends on the lender. We've got some private mortgage lenders that they don't mind. They don't include any sort of prepayment penalty. Some private investors don't want to deal with calculating how much principal has been paid off for extra payments. So, um, you know, that one really fun saying is, he who has the gold makes the rules. And uh, our investors are all across the board, and the banks that we work with, some have no prepayment, some have like the step down prepayment. But I mean, to Will's point, I think the better question is that the highest and best use of your money? And given the opportunities out there, I'm not really sure what market you're in. Sorry if you've already mentioned that a couple times, but with the deals right now, I mean, I think your money's better well off either working towards acquiring another property, or putting it back in reserves if you're not going to completely redo the home that you're rehabbing. Do you see a lot of Dayton being developed, and is it more private development or development of the local government? I think that's a good question. Dayton has some really big plans Um, and I've talked to, one of the commercial realtors here in the area, and he's kind of tired of all of Dayton's plans and all the things that they say that they're going to do, just because there's been such little progress over the past couple of decades that he's been an active commercial lender. So I had a conversation with him just a couple of weeks ago, and it was a different. It was fun to hear his perspective because it's completely different from mine. I've only moved here in 2017, and I feel like I've seen the city take some pretty large steps. I can see some areas that that I don't personally agree with, but that's just because of what my vision is for the city, which matters really little. Um, so most of Dayton is not being developed, I would say. We had two cranes downtown. One was just repairing one of our larger buildings, and one is actually building a new business or a new location for that business in downtown. So that's good. But as far as the residential stuff goes, you very seldom see any like infill housing or new construction. You see a lot of renovations of these properties. And an article was just posted this week from the Dayton Daily News. And Dayton got like a $138 million grant from the federal government. And in that, they said that they were putting a large emphasis on housing and minority owned businesses. And I mentioned on the last live stream that we applied for that grant. We were ultimately declined any of the grant money, which is completely fine. And when I mentioned my disagreement earlier, it's that the city has plans of demolishing a lot of homes. I think I can't remember the exact number, but they're going to spend a lot of money demoing homes. And in the article, it referenced like 10,000 homes in Dayton are are vacant currently. And I think the unfortunate thing about that is I know for sure that there were multiple applicants for that grant that wanted to restore these homes that Dayton is now spending money to tear down. And from what I know about Dayton, I think it's really silly. Now, some homes, sure, they need to be demoed, but there's a lot of properties on that demo list that are not that far gone. They've just been vacant. They've got some title issues that have been, largely impossible for any private citizen to undo, but the city most certainly could with some of the tools at their disposal. But it's a lot easier to tear things down than it is to put in the work to restore it. So I guess from a scalability perspective and trying to fix the problem quickly, Dayton might be doing the right thing. But I think having a bunch of vacant lots that properties used to be on is not nearly as beneficial for the community as actually restoring those community or those homes and allowing people to live in them again. Because now you've just got in perpetuity uh, all like the lawn care, keeping that lot mowed. Vacant lots quickly turn into uh, informal landfills for those streets or for those areas. So I disagree with that, but nonetheless, I mean, there's still a lot of growth. I think Dayton has rock bottomed, and I don't see Dayton doing anything but improving. And who knows? I could have a limited view of what demolishing a lot of these homes, uh, a limited view on the actual impact that it might have. A little bit of a rant there. So,
Yeah, and a lot of the reason you don't see development in the single family space is because we're buying these houses between $20 and $30 a square foot, sometimes up to 40. But to build a new house would cost you at least $100 a square foot, and they just won't sell for that. So
mhm,
there's not much of a reason to buy a house that or to build one.
right. I'm looking forward to whenever the tide turns and we are able to start, and it actually makes financial sense to start building rather than restoring. I think we would run into a lot fewer issues in building just because we're the ones that are doing it from the ground up, so we'll know pretty much exactly how much it's going to cost. There will be very few snags, whereas right now on the renovation side, it's really tough because you start opening up walls and there's no telling what you're going to find, and each property is unique. Um, So even though we think that we're taking educated guesses at making budgets, there's always the potential that something crazy arises. And when I have insomnia and when I feel like dreaming and envisioning the future, I look up all sorts of like cheap building materials, from like the 3D printed homes to the mortarless interlocking blocks that you can build homes with. I think I think there are people out there that are putting a lot of energy and effort into making cheap, affordable ways to build homes, which is pretty exciting. I do not like the storage container homes. Lewis Porter Jr. is planning to move to St. Augustine to buy a multifamily house hack by way of Airbnb. I think that's a good idea. St. Augustine is probably a really good spot to do some Airbnb.
Yeah, yeah. St. Augustine has tons of visitors. I mean, they have a festival of lights, I think is what they call it, where the city puts up a whole bunch of Christmas lights around late November, early December. So it was the very end of 2020 last year, and we took our family there. And this was, when a lot of places in the country were shut down still due to COVID. And I mean, there were thousands upon thousands of people in the streets. So there's people visit there nonstop. So St.
Mhm.
Augustine is one of the oldest and inhabited cities in the U.S., dating back to like the 1500s when the Spanish folks came and settled it.
Hmm. That's pretty impressive. How do you pitch yourself to banks and lenders? Also, what kind of documents do you need?
Yeah, so you could tell them about your track record to start out with, and if you don't have one, then why you would, because they're betting on you ultimately. So why would they bet on you? I mean, try to think of an example before Ryan and I really got started in real estate, because now it's somewhat easy because we say, hey, we've done this 190 times. We know what we're doing. Here's how we plan to exit. Um, and here's what our cash flow looks like on a per house basis. But previous to that, I would say, hey, I'm Will Ingram. I was in the Navy for a little while. I did project management. So this is no different. This single family house, it's just another project to manage. And I've done this several times before. And even though this is slightly different because it's a house instead of my day job, it's still just another project. So I would do something like that. And it also helps when you can show you've got a decent credit score. So anywhere in the 700s is fine. And that you've got some cash set aside too. So no bank wants to lend you to where you'd have to put all your money in to buy this house. Because then, the risk is you run out of money, you can't finish the project, and then you default, and the bank's stuck with a half-finished house. Types of documents you would need. For any house, you would need insurance. I put together a rent roll, and that's probably the most comprehensive thing. Oh, yeah, I don't know if I can share a screen with you or not, but I'll just say what the market rent would be, and then what I expect all the costs to be between the taxes, the insurance. I typically put a management fee in there, which we own a management company, so I still charge us 10%. And then got the maintenance in there. I typically estimate that to be 10% too. I would put what the market value of the place is that you expect it to be, and then what you're buying it for and how much you plan on spending on it to do the repairs. And then there's a calculation that most banks require. It's a debt service coverage ratio, DSCR. And most banks will want to see that above a 1.2. And all that is just the rent divided by your expenses. So if the rent is say $1,200 and your expenses are $1,000 between your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance (PITI), then that would be 1.2.
I think the only thing that I would add is at the beginning, for sure. I think the how good of a deal it is matters a lot. So if you're able to negotiate down the purchase price and just show that it's a very high equity deal, I think that would be a good piece of the puzzle as well. I was thinking about building. Okay, so this is in response to what he was going to do with the money by paying biweekly. But you're correct if it doesn't make sense from a capital expenditure standpoint. Yeah, building up equity is one of those things that I don't know. At first, it might make you feel better. It might make you feel a little bit more secure. But man, equity, all it really does is just sit there completely inaccessible to you. So I think having high equity feels nice, but practically speaking, it's not very helpful to your business.
Yeah. So especially in the single family home market, because getting that equity out if you wanted it is extremely difficult. Most people don't do lines of credit on investment property like they would on your single family home or on the house that you own as your primary residence. And refinancing, doing a cash out refinance is the other way to get your money out. But that also costs a lot. So on a typical refinance that I do, and this is I do lending on just the normal mortgage side too, your Fannie and Freddie loans. But a $200,000 house, the typical refinance fees would be about $8,000 on that. So that's a lot to spend just to try to get some equity out.
I agree. And kind of on that same note, I want to go back to this question for a second because you mentioned the DSCR, but that would be on the commercial side, right? You would have your debt to income if it was like on the personal loan side. Does that change, like going off like the debt to income? Would that change your presentation at all?
Um, I mean, it could help. That would be a little bit tougher for you to calculate because it would be based on your W-2 job or your self-employed job. So it'd be a mixture of what you make, what that property might make, um, divided by all the expenses. So that's a little more difficult to do than just looking at the property itself, but it can most certainly be done.
Mhm.
The bank would just look at everything on your credit report. So they would take everything that you pay on a monthly basis and then divide that, or the income would be divided by that expense.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Are you using banks as hard money lenders? How do you do that? Would cost way less than hard money loan guys.
Um, we don't use a bank as a hard money lender. Banks don't like lending money on projects that need work. Banks like stable projects that are already rented out for the most part, at least in the single family home space. You know, they might be able to do something on the commercial side if you're building an apartment building or office building or whatnot, but that's not what we do. So we use private money for the most part, which is just individuals that we would borrow enough money from to do one house, or some of them want to do multiple houses with us. And then there's one company that we work with that'll lend out 90% of the purchase price and then 90% of the rehab costs as well.
Yeah, and I would say for the most part, our business model is that private mortgage investor, and we borrow 100% of the purchase price and 100% of the rehab costs. Now, our formula for that is we want the purchase price plus the rehab costs to be equal to or less than 75% of what the property would appraise for after everything has been done and it's rented out. And then we would take that. Now, we would package it with a couple of different properties and then refinance it with a more traditional lender on that long-term debt. And when you're using the private money individuals for that first position mortgage, since it's something that you're putting together from someone that and you're orchestrating all of the administrative things, then there's no origination points, there's no fees. Um, so that's really cheap for us. On some of the larger projects, like the bank that we've been using to do 90% of the purchase and 90% of the rehab, that has allowed us to get into some projects that the terms that we borrow money from the private lending individuals, it just wouldn't make sense. So I'm thankful for that hard money lender in particular. And what do they charge for points? Will
They're typically around 2 points, sometimes
2
between
points.
2 and 3.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I mean, but they'll also charge a processing fee or an underwriting fee. We'll have to get an appraisal done. And then there's typically a few other fees in there. And then they would charge like either 3 or 6 months of interest payments up front.
Mhm.
So it can be relatively expensive to work with compared to your private money people.
Where
But
the
they
hard,
also are not limited on any dollar amounts, you know. So if you can do as big of a project as you want to with those guys.
yep, and on the private money side, there's also that no appraisal fee, which I think is like $450 per appraisal, but it can start adding up at any scale. And then I think the refinancing of on the back end is probably the most important piece of the financial structure. But I also, we do our best historically, and I mean we still do, to avoid those origination fees or points or stuff like that on the front end. Because those can kill a deal, especially on these like lower than 80, 90,000 ARV homes. So Irene says, I think the private money lenders are better if you can find them for sure. Um, in the video that I made yesterday about the 100 homes in a year, that I mean, we have been actively trying to find and like networking with people that could potentially be private money lenders since 2018. And it's taken us a really, really long time. And I don't know, it's really hard. But again, I kind of view it as you can do the hard money lending at like 4 points or whatever per purchase, or you could try and like save that money or pay yourself for doing the legwork and finding the money yourself. It's difficult, but I think to your point, it's well worth it. Have any banks adjusted their rates on your property so far?
I don't. We might have one loan that's got an adjustable rate, but all the other ones are fixed. So no to that one.
I think we're about to refinance out of that one loan as well.
Yeah. Not because the rate adjusts, but just because we got a ton of equity in it and we're trying to pull some out.
When we first started, we accidentally purchased some properties. I say accidentally, I mean they're great deals, but those areas have appreciated significantly compared to others. So that was one where there's a lot of equity in that we would just like to use to continue growing the business.
Yeah. And if you look at interest rates over the past 20 years, they've only gone down too. You know, so everybody's scared of the adjustable rate or the rate adjusting. But I mean, I think the likelihood of it adjusting to something that would be way too expensive for you or something that you couldn't afford is pretty slim.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to double it overnight, you know.
Because these rascals are in it for making money as well, and they, if they were to call your note or if you were to pay it off, I mean, their stream of income from that loan would stop. So, even though there's a slight conflict of interest when you're talking with these lenders because they want to be as conservative as possible to protect their money, and you want to get the most amount of money that you can in order that so you have more room to go out and grow some more. At the end of the day, I mean, you're both working towards the same goal, and you're partnering on these projects. So they've got a business to run. You've got a business to run, and there are ways. So I don't, as much as the banks at the end of the day, the way they write their notes, the power is really in their hands to be able to like call things or change things. It's ultimately not in their best interest either. Great strategy. Private money is better. Hard money loans cost me an average of 5K per project. Wow. Too expensive. I did 23 deals this year. Too expensive. Yeah, so if you were to take a step back and try and become your own hard money lender and source source the money yourself, 23 times 5,000. I know Will's already got the answer. That's $115,000 you could have saved if you were able to raise that money yourself.
Yeah.
So
And you also have to think about how much time would it take you to raise that money?
that's a good point.
Because I mean, are you better off having those 23 houses and having spent $5,000, each extra to get them? Or, would you be better off spending a lot of your time going to go raise the money yourselves? Because I mean, they're two different business models,
Hmm.
you know. So do you even have the time to go take on finding the private money lenders?
I think that's a really good point because if you've made $300,000 on the 23 deals, then it wouldn't really make sense for you to check up to try and save that money. And I think to Will's point, we went to a conference at some point, and that was one of our biggest takeaways is the realization that we're running multiple different businesses inside of the one business. So money raising is its own business.
Yeah.
Man, Cameron Bennett with the super chats. I appreciate it. What books are we reading these days? Who Not How, right?
That's the one I'm reading right now. I just finished up Richest Man in Babylon for the second time. That's always a good book.
Now, did you listen to the one that I recorded for the YouTube channel? Did you listen to me reading it?
I didn't listen to you read it, but you should, So,
yeah, I read The Snowball recently. I've always had a fascination with Mr. Warren Buffett, and The Snowball is his book, and he's a very logical fella. I've had a lot of fun learning about him, and then
isn't that a 20-hour book to listen to?
it is long. I'm looking at Audible right now. It's saying I've got 35 hours left. So.
Goodness, it's a 2-day listen.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Cameron Bennett. You've asked some good questions, and now that I know how to slice this up and make snippets or clips, I'm definitely gonna do some of your questions as well.
Yep. And another book that I liked, it was just Rhinoceros Success. I mean, it's a silly book, but it was pretty fun.
Yeah, it's super silly. That's on my list of books to reread on at least an annual basis. Anytime I'm feeling a little down, I'll read that book. I'm trying to think. At one point, I had rhinos all throughout my office. I only see one at the moment. It is really silly. It's like the best of all possible versions of like an adult children's book. Are you getting 30-year notes when you cash out refi? At what rate and term do they lend in Texas?
Yes. The last one we did was a $3 million loan at just under 5%, so 4.775. It's 10 years interest only, and then amortized over 20 after that. But the interest rate stays the same the whole time. Do they lend in Texas? Yes.
That's so. If you're in Texas, I mean that makes your 23 deals even more impressive because you doing one deal in Texas is like us doing 5 deals here.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you've got any questions, feel free to post those in the chat. We've got 23 people on, 50 minutes in, and 24 people on now. That's exciting. So this is like a classroom full of people. In the meantime, I think we could catch some people up while we're waiting on some questions of all the things that we've got going on this week. We had a really interesting deal kind of pan out. So we've been working on this for a couple of months, and I completely forgot about it. And I say that because the chances of everything going appropriately were just so slim that I didn't even want to tie up any of our resources in like figuring out if this was going to work or not. But we purchased 2 properties from an individual that used to be the property manager for a fellow that had like 30 or 40 properties, and he was named executor of the estate whenever the fellow passed away. And he sold a lot of the properties, and I guess made a number that he was comfortable with on the profit side. And after we purchased two properties from him, using PropStream, I saw that he had a lot more properties. So I made it a point to like be at the closing when he was there, and I asked him if he had any additional properties that he wanted to sell. And he said that because he was executor of the state, there were a couple of properties that he no longer wanted to pay the mortgages on and pay the taxes on. So they were starting the foreclosure process on them. And he said that he would just let them go, since he enjoyed, I guess, our conversation, and said that he would much rather them go to me rather than some big bank or larger outfit. So he said that he would sell them to us at cost for whatever the banks wanted. So we signed a contract later that day. We worked with the title company to get payoff statements. It has been several months, and the title company just told us this past week that they have gotten all the appropriate payoff statements, and it comes out to be about $36,000 per home. And it's a good deal. I mean, two of them are currently rented, which is wild. I don't know when the last time they paid rent are. And then one of them is vacant and needs about $5,000 or $10,000 worth of work. But I would say they're all worth somewhere around the $80,000 mark, probably as is. And then once we were to over improve them, they would probably be closer to that $100,000 mark. So they're all right in the area that we love investing in. So it's a fantastic deal that I'm really looking forward to making a video about, not only because PropStream is in the picture, but also just because it's a really bizarre story where it was part of the pre-foreclosure process, which is fun. And then it just came from, a genuine, wholesome conversation. And, walking into $30,000 of equity per property is it's really nice. It's a good thing. It's a fun story, I guess. So we're closing on those at the end of next week. I got lost in my own words. That's why I started saying it, is that's a deal that came to fruition that we're closing on next week.
Yeah, and this is also another deal where it's like, hey, you guys need to have the money by the end of next week, because otherwise we're not going to be able to finalize the deal. So
Right.
it's always good to keep some extra dollars laying around, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to take advantage of this deal or know where to go to get the dollars in a very short time frame.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think we got the green light on this at the beginning of this week, and we need like $118,750 in order to close these deals by the end of next, and we have to close them by the 20th. Otherwise, I think like the foreclosure process is like in too deep. I don't know. I haven't put much thought into it or analyzed it, but I'm just going off what the title company is saying, that we need to close by the 20th. So to Will's point, that's really important, because if we didn't have the ability to do that, then we would have missed out on these deals and that equity. Mom lives in Houston. Tell me again why Texas is better, please. Oh, I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying that their properties are a lot more expensive. Houston is that place that floods all the time, right?
Got hit by some pretty bad hurricanes.
Are you coming across investors selling portfolios, or mainly just individual sales? I would say the bulk of our properties just come from individual sales, just us getting, one off here, one off there. Every now and then we'll have portfolios of like 3 or 4. This year, the largest portfolio that we purchased was, man, do we
18?
close that package of 20 this year, or was that last year?
I think it was 18 houses. One was a 3 unit, and that was this year.
That was this year?
Yeah, we closed that in April.
Okay. So yeah, the largest
20
package.
doors,
Yeah,
18 properties.
20 doors. So that was the largest. And then we closed another package of 11 properties this year. And then I would say that's it. Just off the top of my head, I remember buying 2 properties from one individual. But that comes from, I mean, that they were listed on the MLS individually. And I mean, just we occasionally have a decent amount of success by just asking people if they have other properties that they're interested in selling. And PropStream, that linked properties feature, is pretty invaluable for that. Just as we put the property under contract, I just click that linked properties button to see if it's worth having an additional conversation with the fella about any other properties they might want to sell. Who's a long-term lender? Can you share? I invest in a small town in Texas, 30 to 60K purchases, only 3 at above 100K of the 23.
Yeah, DLP is the one that we've been working with. So 30 to 60 grand purchases. It would depend on what the after repair value would be, because they have a minimum loan amount threshold. So I'm not exactly sure what it is, but Ryan and I run into it all the time too.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we have to find different ways to get the deals done.
Yeah, part of me thinks that it would be significantly easier to finance a lot of properties if we were just to go above that the minimum. Like if we were just to only invest in properties above $100,000, but then the returns would go way down. So right now, it's a very welcomed problem to work through, that minimum purchase.
Yep.
I'll put up your email address again too, will@ingramcapital.us. 1L.
Yeah. So 263 Holdings. If you want to send me a message, then I'll get you in touch with the right people.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Let's see here. Let me go ahead. We've got the disclaimer rolling. Any questions that you might have, go ahead and post those in the chat. 263 Holdings says that I guess awesome means that he'll send you an email. And congrats. I sure do appreciate it. We're having tons of fun doing this, and I know that returns are important, and nobody's in the business of losing money, but I'm having the time of my life doing all this, and there's a great deal of satisfaction that comes along with taking properties that to 263's points might hit that $30,000 to $60,000 threshold, and then just improving them and raising their worth tremendously. It's good, and I think all communities could really benefit from investors going in and making the existing housing stock significantly nicer. Well, Will, generally when there's a lull in questions, I'll put up this post your questions in the chat and then just rant about something kind of random. Do you have anything that you want to rant about?
Yeah. So this book that we're reading right now, Who Not How, we've seen that play out quite a bit this year. We used to do a lot of the work ourselves, and I mean we've always hired contractors, but we've always tried to fumble our way through issues or problems ourselves. And I mean this year we hired 3 employees, and I mean it's amazing how much it reduced the workload of the work that we aren't even that good at.
Yeah.
So it would take us a lot of time to do. Uh, for example, like leasing. Leasing has never been something that's been fun for us. Taking prospective tenants around to see houses, or just doing all the paperwork. But we've got a guy now who does that, and he enjoys it, and it's great.
And
So
people rave about him, and he does significantly better than than we ever did.
yeah.
Also, our project manager that we hired. So, you know, at the beginning of this year, and since we started, I've always been the one that like kind of went around to the properties, made sure that the contractors had everything that they needed, make sure that they're, actually at the job sites, and kind of harass them if they're not, or, always try and get like updated time schedules or like completion dates. And I did okay at it, but with like the other businesses, it was always just kind of something that took up a lot of time, and I was not the greatest at like taking notes or holding people accountable to doing what they said. And our project manager, I mean, he keeps everybody on a much tighter time schedule. People are actually doing what they say that they're going to do, and it's really fun and really impressive to watch. And it's crazy how it was a really tough decision for us to hire him, and financially it was a hard one as well. But I think now, having experienced the fact that our product and service has dramatically increased, he does a better job than we ever did, and it gives us more bandwidth to acquire homes. It's kind of a no-brainer at this point. So I've heard from other small business owners that your first hire is always the most difficult, and I think I can echo that sentiment. All right, Brett Wickstrom says, any suggestions for investing in an area where ARV is not much different than purchase price, but properties still cash flow? Market in my area has solid growth, but homes go quick. That's probably similar to Jacksonville, right?
Yeah, and I could say that in any area. Um, I mean, in Jacksonville, it'd be tough to find deals. I'm not in the business of trying to find deals here. So most of what we do is in Dayton. I enjoy being on the lending side of it and the finance side. So Ryan is mostly on the acquisition side, finding these deals. Um, but people are out there finding deals below after repair value. Um, my wife and I just sold a house here. We got one rental on the north side of town, and I was looking at all the other houses that sold in that area, and we got our house selling for 290. The house across the street, exact same layout, same square footage, everything. Somebody bought it 8 months ago for 110. So it's like I don't know how these people do it, but there's people out there that are finding uh, people to sell their houses below market value. So I don't know if they're using mailers, if it's networking, probate. I don't know how they're getting the deals, but I'm sure it's hard work. But people are out there finding these deals somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And in a market like that, you've got to be able to act quickly when you do come across a deal. So, do you have your financing lined up already? Do you have some private money people to help you take the deal down? So, it's just stuff I would think about.
Yeah, there are a lot of people, and I think in any market, the way to get deals, you kind of have to take up the burden of like just the time and the labor it takes to like go out, do the direct mail marketing, do the text message blasting, do the research, and spend a lot of time sourcing off market deals the same way that like a wholesaler or potentially even a realtor would. And there's a guy, here locally that he comes up with all sorts of deals, and a lot of people just don't want to deal with the process of going through a realtor, making repairs. When people get emotionally just done with a house, they really just want to like let it go. And in hot markets, realtors really want the owners to make all of the appropriate repairs in order to sell it for top dollar. And a lot of people just aren't interested in that. So I would say that if the market is really competitive like that, then I think it would be most prudent to try and figure out how to set up some sort of um, lead generation that you're in control of. I know carrot.com is a really good place to start as far as like deal flow and sourcing your own deals, and they'll help you through like getting the SEO and whatnot set up so that if somebody wants to buy or sell a property in that area and they just, as is and just get on the internet, and look for it, then you'll be one of the first people to pop up.
Yeah, and we work with a lot of wholesalers too, and sometimes their fees aren't crazy. I mean, typically they build them into the house, but as long as the numbers still work to where we like it, we don't mind paying the fee. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
one of the houses we just bought recently, I saw the wholesaler had a $9,000 transaction fee on there, on a $30,000 house. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, the house after we do what we need to it'll be worth what, Ryan, like 75, maybe 80 grand.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to put about 10 into it. So it's still a good deal for us.
Yeah, I think the largest fee that we've paid so far has been 15 grand. But we bought that house for 25,000 and it was rented for 750 a month. So it's
Yeah.
tough. If the fee makes sense and you can do it, um, and yeah, we're not opposed to paying them. I think that would be one of my. I think getting more hands on like the marketing side and like the deal sourcing. I think if I had like an infinite amount of time, that's something that I would be really interested in trying to figure out or somehow bring in house. Not because I don't want to pay the wholesaler fee, just because especially thinking through like trying to acquire 200 homes next year, um, and holding myself accountable and being self-reflective enough to like, are we set up appropriately to make this happen? I think that's one of the weak points in our business model. It's just in one of the ways that we rely on other people. Let's see. Oh, this is fun. Hey guys, have you ever worked with business lines of credit? My broker says I need to have it liquidated into cash to have in a bank account to show lenders how to liquidate business credit cards. And then the follow up of that is I thought I would just need to write a check to my title company.
So it looks like your broker or your realtor is asking you to have proof of funds. So if your bank can give you a proof of funds letter for that line of credit, then you wouldn't have to liquidate it. But if you've got business credit cards, then that could be different. So I mean, I don't know if you're going to get a bank to say that you've got cash ready to go in your credit card account. Yeah, I mean, they might, but it sounds like what your broker really needs is just a proof of funds letter.
Hmm. Yeah, and I would, I'm sure you do. I just don't see it here. I would be very leery about like maxing out credit cards or using lines of credits to acquire properties without a really solid exit plan and a way to sustain yourself in the interim. So I would really, really want to make sure that you've got an appropriate reserve set aside. So whenever anything needs done on the property or whenever things come up that are very unexpected, you've got the means to pay for that. And then I would also really want to see that you've got an exit strategy to turn that into long term debt. One of the things that one of our business coaches told us is lines of credit are short term debt that you should use as working capital or to acquire short term assets. And when he said short term assets, just to clarify, he wasn't even talking about our business model. He was just talking about like inventory, things that you have to sell. He said that you should not use short term debt to acquire long term assets. And um, I think if you were to look back at when 2008 happened, I saw a chart the other day that showed like the changes in mortgages versus like the changes in HELOCs, and HELOCs were the ones that were hit the hardest. Mortgages were very little impacted from that chart. That I wouldn't even know how to find it again if I wanted to, but I would say just in talking to all the people who lost significant sums of money in that last correction, it was one of the first things to go was their lines of credit. Um, so I would just be very careful as to how you utilize those funds, and I would be crystal clear on both your reserves and your exit strategy.
Yeah. And Ryan and I, we've got a credit card just through our local credit union that is pretty much same as cash, meaning that we can take our entire credit card balance and shift it over to our checking account if we wanted to. and it's only 8%, so it's awesome.
Yeah, local credit unions are really handy for that kind of stuff.
Yep.
When you come across deals that don't check your boxes or simply just don't want, do you have a network you pass them on to? Um, I like to think that I've referred a decent amount of deals to other people. Um, I don't. There's no like systematic way that we do it, and whenever I have passed on deals, I have like no expectations of compensation in return. And I would also say if the numbers make sense on a deal, we so most of our boxes are from like a return perspective. We have a preferred location, but if the deal makes sense and the only box that we don't check is the location, I think it depends on what stage we're in. But most of the times we'll probably buy it, even if it's slightly outside of where we normally purchase. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I forwarded a lot of deals.
Yep.
But maybe that's an area that I should be more intentional about because I know that I've done it a handful of times, but I don't think it's something that I regularly do. Because a lot of these wholesalers have like pretty large networks, and realtors have pretty large networks, so they sell them pretty quick. And also, I would say that at this point, our realtors and wholesalers are so familiar with what they are sending our way because they know what we're interested in that they don't send too much that doesn't fit our appetite. However, I do currently have a voicemail from a wholesaler. She called yesterday and wanted to know if our buying criteria has changed because she wants to sell us a property in Franklin, Ohio. But that's way out of where we invest. But I made no intentions of passing that deal on. So thanks, Dominic. I'm gonna be more intentional about that because I do think that's a good idea. I plan on using the business line of credit for a burr 6 months tops. That's tough. Do your research, 17th Love. Make sure that you've got on the back end a bank that only requires 6 months or less of seasoning. I think a lot of people get trapped in this burr model um, because they think that they can just refinance whenever the property is rented out. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I think Will, you've got some opinions on this because you're hands on with the bank, but you do your best not to send the properties their way that don't have at least 6 months seasoning, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I won't really ask a bank to refinance a property if we've owned it for less than 6 months. I mean, the one lender that we've got a couple $1 million with right now, I mean, they might be flexible enough to entertain something like that if we averaged it in with all the other houses, some of which we've owned close to a year. So it kind of all averages out. But I mean, most banks have at least a 6 month seasoning requirement. And when COVID hit last year, some of them even hiked that up to 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
So I just ask you, are you going to be okay if it takes 10 months or 12 to refinance this house instead of 6?
Yeah, and I made a video about why Burr is nonsense. And really, my main point of that video is, let's look at all of the ways that you can interact with real estate investing. You can buy properties, you can renovate them, you can refinance them, you can rent them, and then what else can you do? You can sell it, and then you can live in it. Am I missing anything on these?
You can let it sit vacant.
Yeah, you can let it rot. That's a um, yeah. So the only thing that this quote unquote strategy did was like repackage real estate investing. So, I mean, it's just a different way of saying buy and hold. The only thing in addition that it does is put an unrealistic time frame on the process. So, I mean, if you talk to any real estate investor that's been in the buy and hold sector for any time, then they have done this BRRRR strategy. It's like somebody tried to rebrand water. You know, it's quite the stunt. So, letting it sit vacant is my current business model. That's a good one. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm leery of that, and you know the whole time frame. It's so far outside of the investors' control. I mean, the contractors, they finish when they finish. The banks, they refinance the property when they want to refinance the property. You know, it's we at one point. So I need to do a better job at making videos about the mistakes that Will and I have made, because I think a lot of people only hit the highlights. Now, part of that is because most people only click on the highlights, and then other parts of that are because talking about your mistakes is just super embarrassing. And it's really easy to be like a Monday morning quarterback and say, wow, it would have been very easy to avoid that mistake. Silly person. So there's a certain level of transparency and vulnerability that I'm not always comfortable with on some of the mistakes that we've made. But one of the reasons that I'm so outspoken against trying to do that strategy is because one of the biggest mistakes that we have made, that's not true. It's not one of the biggest, but one of the ones that were just a real oopsies is we took on a couple of private loans that had a one year balloon. And sure, we bought the property, we rehabbed the property, and we got it rented out in that time frame, way less than that time frame. But it took us a really long time after that for the banks to refinance it, and it had everything to do with seasoning. And you know, Will was working as hard as he could to find lenders willing to work with us, but it's just out of your control, and you don't really know. So that's why, you know, we're definitely saying make sure that the bank is crystal clear on your strategy. Fortunately, that private lender was willing to extend the loan on our behalf, so we just signed an extension. But
and one of the banks told me they would work with a 6-month seasoning requirement, but then it took them 4 months to close the refinance. You know.
Yeah. Thanks, Norris Stocks. I appreciate you. Yes, yeah, School of Hard Knocks is. And I think if this were like an actual classroom of people, not recorded forever indefinitely to be repeated by anyone, then we would probably be a lot more vocal and transparent. But hey, I'm working up towards it.
And welcome, Josh. Josh and I are actually classmates from the Naval Academy. So had a good chat with him yesterday. He's over in Tampa doing some good work with rental properties. He's got 3 of them.
Oh, nice. Yeah, when you told me about that, I was like, wait a second. Not everybody that went through your naval class lives in Florida, right? Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, we've got 19 people on. We're an hour in. Generally on the live stream, we kind of I think we hit like 28 or north of 25 for just a couple of minutes, but it very seldom is it sustained. So we've had a really good turnout, and people are bringing some really awesome questions. Another wonderful and informative video. So much. Always enjoy your comments. I really appreciate it, Earl Johnson. I appreciate you. And thanks for the comment after the video ended last week. Thanks for always trying to catch it when you can, when work permits. I appreciate it. It's definitely something I need to consider. Does my broker have a better ability of finding a bank that doesn't require 6 months seasoning? I'm under the impression that the pro broker must have got cut off. I wonder if this has like a maximum number of letters you can type in. It happens pretty frequently.
Sounds like 17th Love is working with maybe a mortgage broker. to find a bank, and it would depend on what type of a broker your mortgage broker is. Like if they only work with the Fannie and Freddie type people, because they're going to require at least 6 months. The 6 month thing is to where you can use the new appraised value, so of the property, meaning that if you try to refinance out before the 6 months, then you have to go off of the purchase price as the value, which would pretty much mess up any investor with the same strategy that we've got of buying a house, fixing it up, and then using that new repair value to get your money back when you refinance it. So,
And I would also say that, I mean, we're a huge fan of having a team. Um, we're a huge fan of working with other people and professionals, but there are some things that you shouldn't like blindly outsource or rely on someone else, especially in some of these roles. And I know, a lot of these roles are like on a commission basis, and I know that not everybody becomes crooked just to get additional uh, commission, and that's not what I'm saying. But so much of this real estate process requires an extraordinary amount of time, and being on a commission basis, it's always really hard to put in a lot of time on someone else's behalf and then the deal fall through. So time is limited, and your exit strategy shouldn't be something that you kind of put in the hands of someone else. So just be really careful and make sure that you are hands on some really key areas of the deal. I would say for the most part, the the underwriting of the deal. So making sure that you have a firm understanding of the purchase price, of the scope of work, and the after repair value is really important. And then the financing piece. Those are all really important that you should be very hands on during. You don't have anything else on that, do you, Will?
no.
Cool.
Nope.
What are the best ways to reduce time without a tenant after buying? Faster closing, remodel, refinance, etc. A few days extra on each step really adds up. Um, we've tried to cut corners in this area before, and it's never gone well. Um, pushing the contractors to get done faster uh, ultimately results in a larger punch list or a punch list that goes without being addressed, which then turns into more work orders while occupied. And if you are paying, like if your resident is paying for the property while it has a punch list on it, generally that's not very well received. Now, we've done that more times than we would like to admit. Um, we've marketed properties for rent while they have been under the renovation process a couple of times. And that on one occasion, we were so wrong on our timing that uh, fortunately, she had another place to stay, but we were off by over 3 months. Now she didn't pay for those 3 months, but we held her deposit for that long. And on multiple occasions, I tried to give her her deposit back, but she was just dead set on that property. So, she didn't feel like she was holding up her end if she didn't call on like a weekly basis for like an update. Which it was painful all around. The contractor didn't like being pushed. A lot of unexpected things happened. Um, and from that moment, because we were so off, now I get it was like one of the worst case scenarios, but I made the decision we are never going to post a property for rent again until the renovations, the punch list, and all of that has been finalized.
Yep. And I think there was one instance where we started working on a property before we closed on it. And that was because we knew the seller very well. And I'm pretty sure he was also financing the deal for us. So I wouldn't really recommend that either. if you don't know the seller, personally, and know that they're not going to back out after you've done repairs to the place.
Yeah, that was yeah, that was we would not recommend that. So for that individual, we have a long history of doing business together. They have finance properties for us. We have purchased properties from them. We use the same title company. So he when he closed on it, it would be no different than us closing on it because it was the same title company. So we know that they did a good job. We had a long track record with this fella, so we knew that he's trustworthy. He has our best interest. But yes, we renovated the entire home before closing. That's not good. It wasn't bad in that case, but you shouldn't do that for sure. 17th Love, yes, a commercial broker. I chose a broker instead of a lender company because I'm thinking he has a better chance of finding a bank that does not require 6-month seasoning.
Yeah, you're right. So a broker works with lots of lenders. Like I work part time for Atlantic Trust Mortgage down here in Florida, so I can do any sort of purchases or refinances here in the state of Florida, and I work with 20 different lenders. That's what makes a broker different than working with directly for a lender. Because when you work directly for a lender, you've got one set of products, and if it doesn't fit, if all those boxes can't be checked, then you got to go elsewhere, or that bank just couldn't do what you're asking them to do. But the reason I ask you, to check in what kind of work your broker does is because if all of their loans go to Fannie and Freddie, then all of them will require the 6 months of seasoning. So you got to be able to find a broker that can think outside the box and maybe has relationships with private lenders.
Mm-hmm. And things are also subject to change. To Will's point earlier about COVID. I mean, that when that happens, a bunch of people changed the regulations. So making sure that you're okay if it's not 6 months is also really important. That makes me feel a lot better. Thanks. I've been stressing, really trying to push myself to move faster. My wife will appreciate me slowing down a bit. I guess watching too much Bigger Pockets. They mean well and they help a lot of people. And they've introduced a lot of people to the benefits of investing in real estate. But sometimes a lot is left out. I feel like it's kind of detrimental to the end investor. So
Yep. And I mean, we've been working really hard to get our rehab timeline to an average of 30 days. So our ideal circumstance would be, close on a property and then have it at least listed for rent 30 days later. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But I mean, more realistically, before we started tracking this, we were closer to 3 months to finish a project. So
yeah, and I'm pulling up our spreadsheet now just to let's see. All right, so we don't even have that average on there anymore because we've got a couple properties. One that are really skewing our numbers and our averages, but we've got one property that's been under rehab for 359 days.
Yeah. Be a nice Christmas present to have it finished up.
I know, right? Another one that's been vacant for 152 days. Another one for 157 days, and then another one that's been 121 days. Well, that last one's not true anymore. That one is off. That one is done now. So 359, 152, 157. Now, all of these have a fantastic story behind them that make it not so horrible. But, I just since I mentioned us being transparent earlier, I figured I would show a couple of our skeletons in the closet.
Yeah, and we're just talking about an average of 32. So we know some houses just need floor and paint, and that might be 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then we know other houses might be a full gut rehab that might take closer to 2 or 3 months, just depending on the contractor and their skill set and their availability.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And the 359-day one, I feel like that's just so egregious that we should tell that story. And that is ultimately the city of Dayton had this program called lot links that they were doing for a while, which if the property was vacant for 2 years, if the utilities were off, and it was at least 2 years delinquent on back taxes, you could put down a deposit of like $750, and then they would do the boards of revisions foreclosure, and then after like 18 months they would deed you the property free and clear. So while we were waiting on getting this property, that program got shut down. So we were awarded this property, but when the program was shut down, they no longer had any like time restrictions on how quickly you needed to get it done. And this was a massive, massive project. So we had a total of 4 lot links properties that we got from this program, and one of them only needed about $10,000 worth of work, and one of them needed like $60,000 worth of work. And that one that needed 60,000, that was also the same one that I just mentioned. We accidentally rented it out like 3 months before the lady was able to move in, and we that was an exhausting project. So after we completed that one, we didn't want to um, take on another really large rehab like that. Now we replaced the roof on this property. We put in new windows. We updated the HVAC system. So we prevented any additional damage to it. And we also did some things like we removed all the trees in the yard. It's not like it's been an idle project for that long. We've definitely been maintaining everything, but it needs like a complete overhaul on the interior as well. We put new plumbing in it. It's just we're going so slowly on it, and because we got the property for a total of $2,500, and that was just in legal fees for the city. So technically, it was a free property, and we've just been putting money into it, um, as contractors are available. But you can get really burnt out doing very large projects back to back. I'll definitely check out Fannie and Freddie. This is very insightful. Good. I'm happy. I'm happy you feel that way. And thanks for the question, 17th Love. Now that I know how to download these and chop them up, that's definitely one that I've already earmarked in my head to go back and release that as a standalone video. So thanks for that question. Super helpful. Dominic says, do you all utilize any government programs to help fill your rentals outside of Section 8? No.
There's one business that we work with that places people into houses, and then that business would pay us directly. And we've got like what 8 to 10 houses with them, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of our friends uses another, I wouldn't call them a government program, but it's some sort of a nonprofit that probably gets money from the government just to help people get back on their feet. But I mean, we don't have anything going on with them, but I know there's programs out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm open to do additional programs. It's just right now, I mean, I think everything kind of ebbs and flows, and like right now, the properties are renting out really quickly, just on the open market. And I know that there are times where Section 8 pays more. Section 8 keeps homes filled better. But right now, we're in a kind of a season where as soon as we post it, we've got a lot of inquiries, and very seldom do properties sit vacant while on the market. So I think if we were to experience a change in that, or if it started taking like 45 days, 60 days to rent out properties, then we would likely look for some additional companies to partner with. We're not opposed to it by any means. So we just haven't had too much opportunity.
Yeah, Section 8, we've got 5 or 6 tenants that are Section 8. So one of the Section 8 inspectors came out, did the inspection, ended up failing our property. So they gave us essentially a punch list or checklist of stuff that had to be fixed. And then they'll send out the inspector again 2 weeks from now. And if all the stuff's not fixed, they'll immediately cut off our payment. So that's something to take into consideration as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't like the idea of renting properties out to someone that has the ability to decide that they don't owe us money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you describe a property that is outside of your buying model? Absolutely. So our criteria that we just recently started getting a little bit more flexible on, when we first started, our main like financial bookmark was we wanted it to be a 2% property. So whatever we purchased the property for, we wanted to be able to rent it out for 2% of the purchase price. So if it was $100,000 purchase, we wanted to be able to rent it out for at least $2,000 a month. Now that purchase price includes that rehab cost. And here lately, we've been going down as low as like 1.5, I think. Um, but so from like a financial perspective, um, if it is below like a 1.5% property, then it's going to fall outside of our criteria. From a geographical perspective, we've got two main zip codes that we really enjoy buying properties in. And inside of those zip codes, we have our preferred neighborhoods. So if it doesn't fall inside of that geographical area, then it's going to fall outside of our buying model. However, if it fits the financial checkbox but fails the geographical one, we'll look further into it. There are entire parts of town that we avoid, but I would be lying if I said, we wouldn't buy in those areas. Generally, what would cause us to buy in those areas is if it's like a 4 to 6% property. It's hard to say no. Like we purchased the property in the area and we bought it for $18,000 and it was rent ready. Pretty bizarre. And it rented out for $700 a month. So something like that's really tough to say no to. But
And even then, you have to think about how am I going to get my money back on this property? Because a lot of banks, like, I mean, if the property won't appraise for 60 grand, then a lot of banks, it'll fall below their minimum loan threshold. So, I mean, if you can't get your money back and you can't leave 18 to 20 grand sitting in that property indefinitely, then it still might not be a good decision to make.
right. On that one, fortunately, we were able to solve it because one of our investors was willing to give us the $18,000 to purchase that property, and it was fully amortized over I think like 8 years. And because there was so much margin on that, we can make fully amortized like 10% payments over 8 years, um, and still turn a profit on that property. So we didn't need an exit plan on that one because it was fully amortized. So we will likely own that property free and clear and never really finance it
Yeah.
unless the property values increase significantly.
And then another property that falls outside of our model, we try to keep everything below 75% of the after repair value, and that includes the purchase and the rehab, just because we're trying to scale this business. So if we have to leave any money in the properties, then it becomes more difficult for us to scale because we'd be limited by the amount of capital that we have to put in,
Mhm.
even if it's as little as say $5,000 a property. If we're going to buy 200 this year, then that'd be what, $1 million that we'd have to leave sitting in equity in these houses. And I mean that's just a lot of capital that we don't necessarily have laying around.
That's a really good point. When you are just beginning, how do you recommend marketing your property absent partnering with Section 8 or any rental assistance program?
In the very beginning, we use realtors. So
Mhm.
most realtors will place a tenant for you. Then you would just have to check out the realtor screening process. You're basically interviewing your realtors or your property. You can go to property management company, and they'll provide this service for you. They typically charge the first month's rent or a portion of the first month's rent, and That's about it. But you want to make sure they're doing background checks, credit checks, income verification, and that's really all.
Mm-hmm. And we have a couple of friends that use Zillow, and there are a lot of, and I think one of the things that I'm most excited about in the real estate investing world at the moment is the role that technology has started playing here recently. And I really think that sooner than later, just the technology and the capabilities of it are going to make even the smallest of mom and pop landlords have the access to the same levels of, um, I guess, the same resources that these larger property management companies have. So, like apartments.com is one. They purchased a company called Cozy, and Zillow also. They both have features where you can put your property on the market with those. They push it out to several different websites that advertise rentals. And they also provide like application services. So you can have the potential residents sign up through apartments.com or Zillow. They can fill out all their information for a fee. They'll run the background check for you. You can input your criteria and it will tell you whether or not the people fit. And I mean, you can get somebody pretty quickly. We've got one friend that has over 100 doors. I think he's around 160, and he exclusively uses Zillow. He actually is old school in the fact that he does not use any one property management software. I think he uses a big spreadsheet. So
160 properties on a spreadsheet's tough.
that's real rough. But I guess if you're used to it, I guess. Um, but yeah, that's the only places that he markets his properties is Zillow, and he's able to keep them filled. I'm currently having the problem with Section 8 for the first time with my payment. My new tenant is leaving another housing assistance program. Section 8 won't pay until they remove her completely. I don't know. Sounds like a setup, but they will back pay. I'm on the second month with Section 8 portion.
Oh, I don't know if Section 8 back pays. I mean, if somebody told you that they would, I would try to get that in writing. Because we had a realtor once tell us that Section 8 would back pay us after we bought the house for the stuff that they owed the previous landlord after we fixed whatever issues needed to be fixed. And that ended up not being true.
Mm-hmm. So 263 Holdings, he said, in that case, do you max cash out? How do you feel about max leverage? Well, I mean, max leverage in the investor space is like 75%. So, max leverage is very conservative still. That's my knee-jerk reaction. But our resident finance expert can weigh in.
Yes, we do max leverage on our properties. So Ryan and I, we own a little over $10 million in real estate, and we owe about 7.1 mil on them. So we're at 71% loan to value to make things easy. And I mean, our cash flow covers our debt service really well. So if our cash flow didn't cover the debt, then I mean, we wouldn't go to max leverage. But we feel comfortable enough given the rental income that we make compared to the debt service that it's not an issue.
And I think
The bigger issue is just all this equity you're leaving in the houses that it's almost impossible to get out after you close a long-term fixed loan.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking to grow your business, if you don't care about growing your business, then I mean you can leave the equity in the house if you want to.
If you're looking to maximize cash flow on a smaller number of properties, I think it would be imperative to not max out the amount you can cash out. But I also think this comes down to like the individual deal. Um, and like, our formula is generally like we are into the property for less than 75% of the loan to value. and the cash flow is more than sufficient to cover the debt, the reserves, and you know also the property management fee. Um, so I think if we were to have in a property where taking out all of the potential cash that we can would result in us not being able to cover all of our expenses, yeah, we wouldn't do that by any means. But one of our main kind of philosophical pillars is that since we're still in our 30s, so if we just let these 20 to 30-year loans just go out in their natural course, then we're going to have these paid off properties when we're in our early 60s. Now, chances are we're likely going to refinance along the way so that we can acquire some more properties. But since we've got such a large, God willing, time frame on the horizon, then I think it's most prudent that we leverage that time by keeping our personal cash on hand to acquire more, so that we can benefit more so by the appreciation, the tax benefits, and that principal pay down. Because the appreciation in these large numbers gets pretty bananas. So I'm like, as Will mentioned, that $10 million portfolio, a 2% rate of appreciation is 200 grand. That's a lot of money in a year. That's more than we've ever made in a W-2 job.
Yep. And I mean, I would also say that it depends on what sort of interest rate you can get these long-term loans at too. Because right now, if we got the choice between taking an extra 20 grand out of the deal to get to max leverage or leaving that 20 grand in there, I mean, we're borrowing long-term money around 5%, plus or minus 0.5%.
Mm-hmm.
So we can lend that 20 grand out. Let's say we decided to take it out. We can lend it out as a hard money lender to our friends who have the exact same business model as us that we trust at 12%. And we could make essentially a 7% spread doing that. So that to us is still better than leaving the money in the house.
She says he has a bank doing 85% loan to value at 20 years, and he's been maxing it out to grow aggressively. He's generally all in around 65%. That's a fantastic setup.
Yep.
And I mean, 20 years, that's an aggressive
Yeah.
amortization as well. So great job for being able to cover all the expenses, make a profit, and pay down at a 20-year rate.
Yeah. Because your principal pay down is probably like 40% of your actual principal interest payment. So that's pretty good too. So
Is it difficult to secure financing for a rental property for 50,000 and under?
yes, it is. It is almost impossible. I mean, I tell people you'll have to call on average to get like between 10 to 15 lenders to get the terms you want. And at the 50K and under, I mean, you might have to call 30 or 40 people to find somebody who will do that long-term debt for that property. You could go the Fannie Freddie route if you want to, because some of those guys don't have any sort of minimum. And that just means you'd have to put the property in your personal name. I did one loan. It was an investment property, $29,000. So Caliber Home Loans was the lender I went to. So if you can find a mortgage broker that works with them, you could probably do it as a Fannie Freddie loan.
How many? So I often say, I mean, probably on all the live streams and in a lot of the videos, that you look for financing really aggressively, similar as I look for properties. How many hours a week would you say, when you're looking for funding, do you allocate towards just calling banks and meeting with their representatives?
Yeah. So there was a stretch of time where it was probably half the time that I spent out of any given week was just trying to navigate talking to these small banks or these lenders or anybody to figure this out. And then after we figured it out and we found somebody that fits our business model, I mean, I no longer had to spend half my week calling around. Occasionally we'll end up with a property that falls below their threshold. And now, I mean, we just hit that point. So now for 2 properties, I might have to go find a different lender. So that'll take some time. And this is one of those 50K and under properties. So it'll take me a while. Or the other option is we can bundle this with a lot of other properties. And as long as the average is above, call it 60 grand, then the lender might be willing to do it. But
Yeah.
it's just a lot of work.
Yeah. And I would say that's a really good point as to why people sell or package portfolios to begin with. I mean, a lot of times, especially when we're looking at purchasing portfolios, the main reason the seller is incentivized to sell them all collectively is because there's just one or two properties that just can't sell individually. They would have a really hard time to, and they don't want to sell all the good ones and be stuck with the one or two bad ones. So the first portfolio of properties that we ever purchased was from one of our mentors who's done a significant amount of hand holding and teaching and has helped us in ways that we can't quantify. But he sold us a package of 13 properties, and he was very upfront about it. He was just like, hey, these are my worst performing properties, but to someone that's just getting started, it would be a fantastic boost. And there was one property in particular, which was going to be our first main or large rehab project. And I went around, I looked at all the properties, was a huge fan of all of them except for this one. So I went back to him and I was just like, hey, I'm really interested in all of these except for this one. Can we please remove this from the portfolio? And he was just like, well, I don't really want to do that, but I'll tell you what, I will remove it, but the price and the terms are going to stay the same. So essentially, that was at that point, it was going to be a free house. So even though it needed a full rehab, we put about $28,000 worth of work into it. And ultimately, we structured it where we took the house, but that one was not included on the loan. So there's no underlying mortgage. So the amount of money that we had to put into the rehab was the amount of money that we needed to do like a cash out of. So it worked out well for all parties, but there's always one or two in any portfolio that make it to where it's a portfolio. Because if it was all perfectly performing properties, then that seller would be incentivized to take a little bit longer to sell all of them, but do so for retail rather than the bulk investor price.
Yep. And we bought a package of properties earlier this year. We got 11 of them for 275 grand. And one of the properties in that bundle was for $9,000. So there's almost no chance we'll be able to get financing on this one long term down the road. So it's just something that you got to take into consideration up front.
Yep. Yeah, that property. And the crazy part is it's on a nice part of town. Like I think we can probably, like if we were to demo that house, the value of the lot would go up tremendously. But it's rented out.
I know that's something that my go-to lender won't do. So I'll either have to find a different lender to work with on this bundle of houses, or just not refinance this one, or go find a private lender that'll be willing to give like a 15-year term amortized, something like that.
Oh, that's great news. Check that out, Will. 17th Love says she's got it recorded that the supervisor said that they will back pay.
Awesome. Great work, 17th Love.
Mm-hmm. We did that one. Are you actively raising capital, or is that just a one-time thing and now you deal with banks exclusively? We
use both. We are still raising capital. I mean, we're aggressively trying to buy 200 houses next year. So we need a mixture of capital. I mean, they each serve their own purpose. So the private capital we use to fix up the houses and to get them stable. And then the banks we use to put long-term debt on the properties. Mm-hmm. So you'll essentially always need both of them. You can work with some lenders that do the hard money lending and then will also do long-term lending. The hard money can get relatively expensive, and then you might come across some projects that just don't fit their initial criteria. So they wouldn't lend on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are, because we're being so aggressive. I mean, we are always actively looking for money. And just to be clear, I mean, the private money that we're raising, it's secured by first position mortgages. So it's all like note investing, I think is a technical name for it for people interested in getting involved in that. We do one investor per property, and it's always secured by a promissory note and a mortgage deed that's recorded with the county. Can a beginner buy a portfolio like that using bank financing, or do banks evaluate your track record?
I think banks would do a little bit of both. So you can buy a portfolio using bank financing. You would have to prove that you're a credit-worthy individual. So it'd be best if your credit score was somewhere in the 700s or above, and then that you've got money set aside to where if things do need to be fixed up, then you can show the bank that you can pay for it. And then you'd have to show that the property's cash flow if they're all rented out. If there's some properties in the portfolio that aren't rented out, I think the bank would ask you to take them out.
Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to think of times that I have heard of portfolios being sold straight to long-term bank financing. Generally, what I have found is that portfolios are either seller financed for a brief amount of time, um, and then refinanced later on by the traditional lender once the assets are like stabilized and the proof of concept has a track record that you can take to the banks, or one investor that has a good relationship with a either hard money lender or a bank. Because I would say most portfolios aren't sold at like their peak performance, so it might not be too attractive to like a traditional long-term lender. Our friend that doesn't have any property management software, he just purchased a package of 70 properties, and that was a portfolio. And that one was really nuanced. It took him about, I would say, 6 to 8 months to get everything straight. He has a fantastic relationship with a local credit union that ended up financing that entire purchase for him. And I would say that's unusual, and they were willing to do it because they've had all of his banking for decades. They see that he has close to 100 rentals, so they know that it's inside of his scope of capability. He's got sufficient income to cover all the new things. But I would say it's most common just from like the insurance agency, and when I talk to other real estate investors that are buying packages, there's always some type of bridge financing in place for a little bit, again, unless it's at peak performance and they're paying full retail for all the underlying assets.
Yeah, and the guy that Ryan's talking about too, he's a self-employed guy that owns his own company and has been working with that bank for a long, long time.
Yeah.
So I would say if you're brand new, you got a brand new relationship with the bank, they probably wouldn't do what they did for this guy.
That's a good point, because his other business is like a 7-figure-ish business. So long healthy track record. How much cash do you need to start flipping?
It depends on how big the flip. I mean, if it's a small house, if you're doing like a $50,000 house, then not as much as if you were doing a $250,000 house. You would just have to see what your budget would be, like what your rehab budget is, and then I'd put some extra room in there. and you got to see what your holding costs are going to be. I mean, on the typical houses that we do, the way we raise money, we pay our investors every month. So each house that sits vacant costs us somewhere between $800 and $1,000 a month, just from holding costs. So, and then your flip time, you'd have to estimate how long that is. You're probably going to estimate like 3 months, and I would say you should estimate 6. So give yourself 2x what you think it's going to take, and then make sure you've got enough cash to get through to the end. Because I mean, people see it all day long of investors trying to flip houses and then throwing them back on the MLS halfway done, and then you have to take whatever price people will give you, and that's how you can lose money in this industry. I mean, Ryan and I bought a few half-finished houses from people, and you normally get them at a pretty good discount because the investor ran out of money. Otherwise, they would have finished the place.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I also think flipping is a really good way of getting started, and I think there's some opportunity there for partnerships. And in some cases, you can kind of pitch yourself to other investors, and you can partner on flips. We've got a friend that has partnered with contractors on multiple flips, and or seasoned investors, to where he doesn't have to put up any of the money, and they split 50% of the profits. So whatever the proceeds are, it's 50-50. He finds the deals, they fund them, and do the contracting piece as well. So there's a lot of room for partnerships, but that is really expensive money. Like if you look at 50% of the profits versus even the 4 points and 12% the hard money lenders will charge, it's the hard money lender will actually be cheaper in that scenario. So partnering is an expensive way, but a way to, without any of your own money, form a track record and gain some experience. So if you're looking to start with little of your own money, and you're not opposed to doing like a couple flips with partnerships where you're splitting 50% to get the track record, you can do that. And then, after the second or third one, you should be able to approach most hard money lenders and show your track record and start getting that cheaper money. But just like to preface that, I know this disclaimer's been rolling. Will and I have never done any flips. I don't even think we've accidentally flipped properties.
We have sold 2 houses out of the almost 200 that we bought. So,
and one of those was just because we purchased it, we got a great deal on it, and it just sat. It was a duplex that used to be a single family home, and we had aspirations of turning it back into a single family home. But the numbers just didn't work on making it a single family home, and I did not want the headache of having another top bottom duplex. So after it sat for over a year of us not doing anything to it other than mowing the lawn and paying the utility bills, we decided that we should just go ahead and sell it. And we were able to do that. And then the second property that we sold, it was just because that particular area just appreciated so much in the time that we purchased it. We purchased it for 40. We had to put about 10 into it, and we sold it for 95, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah.
2 or 3 years later.
Yeah. And from a lending perspective, just if you're thinking about flipping houses and selling them to people, think about who your end buyer would be. Is it going to be an investor that you have to sell at, maybe a little bit of a discount, but it'll be an easy cash offer? Or is it going to be a buyer who may have trouble qualifying for a mortgage? Like the house that we sold, even though it was 95 grand, which is, relatively high for the area, it was still a buyer who had pretty much no money, like an FHA buyer who needed help with closing costs, needed help with this and that, and wanted us to fix a few more things, like $2 grand worth of stuff before we sold the house. So, I mean, we had to shell out an additional $5 grand to sell this house. So just realize you might have that too. If you don't have like here in Jacksonville, at least the houses that are like 200 to 250 and up, you've got some really high qualified buyers in that category. But below that, you've got people who would need a lot of assistance to buy a house.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and definitely a learning experience that we had on this deal. How do you go about finding hard money slash private lenders? Do you pitch to them the same way you would a bank? Um, you know, I think that's one of the more interesting parts about how we've grown so far is we've never actually pitched one of these private lenders. I think that's an area that we should probably hone in on. Again, if we had significantly more time, I think we should. I think we should try to figure out how to become more efficient at raising private money. But we took on our first private investor back in 2018. He was a really good friend of mine. He left his job, rolled over his 401k and to a self-directed IRA, and lent to us. And that was after meeting um, the mentor that sold us that package, and he just kind of showed me the way that he had been raising private money. And I was talking to that good friend of mine, and he said that he would be more than happy to do that. And then from there, it's really just been us being extraordinarily vocal about our aspirations in real estate investing. We've been very vocal about the successes that we've experienced so far. We mention in conversations that we have, it's just like, hey, we regularly take uh, money from friends and family at 10 or 12%. It's interest only. It's secured by first position mortgage. So, in the event of default, unlike the stock market where there's no accountability, if we default, you get an asset that, because the way that we acquire properties is actually more valuable than the money that we're borrowing from you. And you're going to get cash flow from it, because instead of just getting that interest payment, you're also getting like just the full month's rent less your expenses. Now, it's worst case scenario, and we never want to default, but at least there's that accountability and security. So it's kind of like, and then just in saying that, um, you know, people are like, "Hey, I want 10 and 12%." But it always just kind of comes up naturally in conversations with people that we already know and have long relationships with. So I think one way that we indirectly raised private money was when we were first starting. Neither Will or I come from a background of uh, or like knowing how to run businesses. So when we first started this and saw the opportunity on our hands, we decided to go out of our way to get involved with networks and communities of people that did know how to run businesses and whatnot, and just learn from them and run all of our business dealings by them. And these people have businesses of their own that they run. They're very skilled, and perhaps they have capital from their skill set or their business that they don't really know what to do with. They just know that they don't want it in the stock market because they don't want to necessarily lose it. So um, almost all of the private money that we've raised has been indirectly just from being vocal and looking for help about running our own business. Would you agree with all that, Will?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with it. And just put yourself in the investor's shoes. It's like, what do they want to know? They want to know, one, that you're trustworthy, that you're a good individual. Two, that their principles going to be kept safe, that you're not going to lose their money. And then three, are you going to do what you said you would do and execute on this promissory note that you signed with them? Meaning, are you going to pay them on a monthly basis, and then are you going to give them their principal back when you said that you would?
Mm. This is well, real quick before we move on. This is he's in St. Pete.
Nice.
Where's that?
St. Petersburg. It's
Oh,
right
gotcha.
outside of Tampa, on the on the Gulf Coast of Florida.
What do you type in Google when looking for investor-friendly banks? Any good screening questions?
Yeah, investor-friendly banks. I mean, there'd be um, you could call them non-QM lenders, or pretty much any lender that you see that's got a debt service coverage ratio requirement That is a calculation that only people who work with investors would do in the first place. So anybody who requires your DSCR to be, whatever, 1 or 1.2 or higher, then they would work with investors.
Yeah.
Good screening questions. I would ask them what kind of fees they charge. And I wouldn't get too wrapped up in the fees. More than the fees themselves, you need to find somebody who'll do the loan for you. And I would ask them how quickly they can close. Some people will tell you 2 weeks, and that might be true. Others will say, "Oh, it takes us 2 months." And I mean, Ryan and I couldn't close deals if it took us 2 months to close them, because we would lose our competitive advantage. They might as well sell to somebody else. How we get good deals is we say we can close in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, somewhere in there, cash or hard money. And, it'll be the easiest transaction you've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
So
try to remove all those friction points. And then I would say one of the things that we've done is whenever we do find a lender that's willing to work with us, we really try to hone in on like exactly what they're looking for, exactly what they want to see, and we figure out what's important to them. And then we try to like present everything kind of like on a silver platter towards the bank, just to make it as easy as possible for them, so that they have a good experience in working with us and want to continue to do it. Because I mean, especially when we were first starting, what we found a lot of is a bank would do one loan with us, then they might be interested in doing like a second one shortly thereafter. But then when it came to number 3 and 4, they're like, hold on, let's wait for a while. Let's see how you do with these first two.
say, guys, this is really aggressive growth. Are you sure you can handle 3 houses in 1 year? So it's like, well, I have to. I can't live on just 3 houses for 1 year.
Yeah. And then another fun thing is like right when we were first starting, the financing part was the piece that we struggled with the most, which is why, originally Will was selling commercial HVAC equipment, and then he went into the mortgage lending business so that we could learn from the inside.
Yeah. So, and I mean, even though I'm not exactly in the space that works directly with investors, then I still speak the same language for the most part as the other lenders. So that helps out a lot too.
Yeah. Well, we are 2 hours in. We've got 12 people on, and we have hit the bottom of the questions list. He said thanks. So post your questions in the chat. We'll stick around, see if you 12 have any additional questions, or if the viewership kind of picks up over the next couple minutes. Otherwise, we can go ahead and call it a day.
Yep.
We've got some closing starting at 12:30. Sorry, go ahead. What were you saying?
Yeah, I was just going to say that on a lot of the places you see out there, people only tell you they're huge wins. So I think we can share, a loss to show you that it's not all gravy out there. So with these lot links programs, as Ryan was talking about earlier, we found a contractor who said that he would fix, all 4 of the houses for us for, I can't remember quite what it was, somewhere around the neighborhood of $100,000.
Yeah, it was right at 80,000.
Yeah. So he wanted like half the money up front, and then, another X number of dollars every 2 weeks until he finished. So long story short, we paid him way too much, and he did not do near enough work. And then, we shelled out like 40 to 50 grand, somewhere in there, maybe even 60. And then we got, I think, 1 house that was fully completed, and the other 3 still needed a bunch of work.
Yep.
So we ended up losing quite a bit on that one. But we did learn our lesson. We don't shell out 50% up front anymore. Most contractors will ask for it, and then we tell them that we've been burnt and that we can give 25% up front. And most of them are fine with that.
Yeah. And we even kind of push back on that, especially the first couple of times we work with them. Because I mean, if it's for material costs, then hey, we've got the count at all of the places that you can go in the area and get materials. We'll even answer the phone and give them our information when you're at the store. And we try to work it that way if it's for material costs, because the first couple of days, apart from materials, it's just demo. And I mean, I get that there is time, energy, and effort involved in the demo work, but there's no tangible thing that we're left with. So if we give somebody 25% down and all they do is demo work, well, we've still got 100% of the job left to pay for if they walk away or disappear. So if it's like, the third or fourth time that we've used a contractor, 25% is a-okay. And there's a comfort level and just discernment that, I do, the project manager does, and, getting a feel for these guys. But if it's our first time doing work and you request 50% down or 25% down on any money down, really, it's likely going to be a no way. But how else can we achieve the same thing?
Yeah, we've got an awesome project manager now too that works hand in hand with the GCs, and he'll give me a call and say, "Hey, Will, these guys actually did what they said they would do. You can pay them."
Mm-hmm. Ever run into plumbing nightmares? Are you doing camera scopes on pipes before buying? No, we're not. So let's see.
We went through a period of time where we had to replace the main drains going out to the street.
Yep, and that's $2,500 a pop. But then they're good forever, because the reason that the drains go bad is, what is it, like cast iron or galvanized piping. So on the water mains, sometimes the original galvanized water main is just so heavily corroded that the water pressure is horrible. So in that case, it's $2,500, but it's definitely worthwhile. Replumbing an entire house costs about $3,000 for all the supply lines. The water main from the meter to the street is about 2,500, and I say that could be confusing because some places have the outside meters now. From the house to the street is the meters used to be inside, right at the base where the water came into the house. So that's $2,500. And then the drains, I would say if you redo all of that in PVC, I mean, that could be like an extra $1,000, $2,000. So from there, a lot of the costs are probably, you could redo everything remotely related to the plumbing in the house for less than $10,000. So we definitely look at the plumbing before we purchase it. We don't do the drain, and there are certain things that you could do to a house that you have to kind of factor in, like the roof. Like if it needs a new roof, then we'll have to take that off the purchase price. But I'm not so angry if we have to replace a sewer main or a water main, just because um, it does the house a lot of good, and it's going to last for a really long time. Now, I will say that all of the homes that we get generally are on basements or accessible crawl spaces. So, from that perspective, there's no jackhammering of the main sewer drains out of the floor or anything. So, when I say replacing all the drains, that's from the part where it comes up in the basement to the point, like to the stack. So, it's not too hateful, and it's such a value add to the property, that new plumbing feature, that it can all be recovered in resale, I feel like. As an individual who is trying to get into real estate, finding that first investment property and overcoming the fear of losing, what advice can you give? Well, my gut reaction is, you want to do your underwriting appropriately. You want to make sure that the purchase price, the estimated rehab, and the after repair value all line up in your favor. And then after that, you need to have some reserves set aside for one property. I mean, a minimum that I would really feel comfortable with is about $10,000 in reserves. And then outside of that, I mean, real estate is this beautiful investment vehicle where if you just zoom out and look at like the 30 to 50-year time frame, it is really hard to make any mistakes without just being extremely negligent. So, um, yeah, that's my initial thoughts. What about you, Will?
Yeah, I would think so too. And just make sure you're getting the property at a discount. So, and then there's got to be a reason somebody would give you the property at a discount too. It's you got to be solving some sort of a problem for them. You know, if you're buying a house that is essentially, if you're trying to buy a retail house, like a house that's already in perfect condition, it should pretty much sell at market value. So somebody's not going to give you much of a discount on it. But the houses Ryan and I buy mostly have issues or some sort of a reason to why we can get a 30-40% discount on them from what the after repair value would be. And then as far as that reserves Ryan mentioned, that's really important too. And the amount of reserves just depends on the dollar amount of the project you're looking to do. And I would also make sure you got your personal financial house in order too. So, a lot of people say, how can we go from our W-2 job out to being self-employed or doing some sort of real estate venture? And I would say you should have at least a year's worth of living expenses laying around, which sounds like really daunting to some people. But I mean, just start thinking about how you can save up that much. That way you got a comfortable timeline in case anything did go wrong. Or I should say when something goes wrong, because something always goes, not quite your way. But then you'll learn from those mistakes. You won't make them again, and you'll be better off for it.
Oof. He paid $15,000 for from the main up to the kitchen. That had jackhammering though. Makes sense. Yeah, jackhammering really increases that price. And you think he paid a premium? I mean, probably. I can see it both ways. Oh, Will's going to be right back. He must not know that before you do a 2.5 hour live stream, it's very important that you do not eat or drink beforehand. Yeah, there's a lot to be said for repeat customers, especially in contractors' eyes. And I think once we cross that 10 property threshold, and definitely once we crossed that 30 property threshold, we really noticed favor in a lot of the contractors' pricings and time schedules. And we're really fortunate enough to have multiple contractors that we deal with regularly that put us to the top of the list whenever we need something, and that's super appreciated. We're very appreciative. Appreciative is the word that I really want to use, but it didn't fit in that sentence. We're very appreciative of it, and definitely don't take that for granted. And when we've had really tough spots like this before on on something like this, we have had contractors kind of step up and almost do it like at cost. So we had a basement wall collapse once, and that could have been an absolute nightmare. The basement wall collapsed just to groundwater that wasn't being diverted appropriately. But the contractor was nice enough to, just because of the urgency of it, what we did was we paid a certain hourly rate to his people plus materials, and that was all. So there was no bid done beforehand. It was just an agreed upon hourly rate and whatever the materials costs were. So that was very beneficial. But I say that just to say, keep the faith, keep charging hard, and the contractors, because at the end of the day, what they really want is like consistent work, to be treated fairly and make an honest living. My first investment had cast iron pipes, cost me 18,000. I don't think I will ever go without cameras on a house built before the 80s. Whew. My house is on the ground, no elevation. That makes sense. Basements are very beneficial. They cost like, I think when I was looking at building new, I think the cost of a basement is like 20 or 30,000. But just having such, the ease of access to all the plumbing is very beneficial. It's definitely worth it in the long term. Did you know anything about architect before you jumped into real estate, or did you learn as you go? I don't know anything about architect right now. Um, I don't know anything about construction. So that was one of the things that we hired a business coach who's been extraordinarily helpful. But we took property management in house whenever we had about 60 properties. And to your point, I knew nothing about construction. I knew nothing about general contractors. I knew nothing about like what I should pay or what was fair. So I learned on the go. Um, we have really high trusts with two of our contractors who were nice enough to really explain everything to me. And again, I think your character is extraordinarily important. And since these guys saw that I was genuine, that I always treated them fairly, and that I had their best interest, um, they reciprocated that, and they would be very vocal if I was overpaying for something, um, or I got a bid from another contractor that just didn't line up. And it wasn't like, hey, I want that business instead. It was just like a no, 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 like that. You need to get multiple quotes on that, and don't pay for that. And then they would eventually just make some referrals to people that were similarly trustworthy, and it's just been really beneficial. But I mentioned our business coach because when we were analyzing like my role in the business, Will's role in the business, and trying to figure out how to um, achieve any level of scale, just like my personal strengths, none of them. Like I had no background in construction or any idea what I was doing. So it was very beneficial when we were to hire a project manager, and he actually understands this stuff significantly better than I do. So that was a huge bonus once we reached a certain point where we could do that. But I also think that there's a certain level of comfort in real estate because it's such an established industry. I mean, since people have been around, real estate has been a thing. So it's not like any of this stuff is really difficult. And to 17th Love's point, $18,000 down the drain once, you're never going to make that mistake again. Now that's an expensive way to learn, but it's also uh, once you've seen it once in a house, you know how to deal with it, and I think there's a lot of comfort there. Oh, my workout ball. I have back issues, so I think you're not supposed to sit often, and one of the reasons that I'm on this thing is uh, because I think my chiropractor said that the reason that sitting is bad is because your core isn't engaged. So he said if you do have to sit, sit on like this workout ball and keep your core engaged. So then that kind of cancels out the negative aspects of sitting. So that's why I'm trying to do that. Relationships are valuable. Lesson learned. Yeah, absolutely. 8 people, 2.5 hours in, at the bottom of the question queue. Let's see here. Will, do you have anything else?
No, I think it was a great show today. So
Yeah,
really
I agree.
enjoyed it, and thanks for all the awesome questions.
Yep. All right. Well, every Friday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be right here. I don't know, Will, you gonna try to make this a regular thing, or what's your schedule looking like? Every
We'll
now and then.
see. The rest of the year is crazy with all the
Oh yeah,
holidays and traveling and
that's right.
who knows what else. So I think the next few Fridays are already spoken for. But yeah, I'd say I could commit to once a month. Hopping on.
Yeah, yeah, that's fun. Awesome. Oh, uh, What percent automatic increase on rent do you recommend in the lease?
That's tough. That would depend on the property, what your average rent amount is. Um, some states will only let you go up so much, like the rent controlled states. Luckily, Ohio's not one of them. Florida's not one of them. But, and I mean, it depends on how far below market value the tenant is, too. So, Ryan and I, about 2/3 of the properties we buy are already rented out. So, if they're rented out for, something well below market value, like if the rent's 550 and it should be 850, then we'll just explain that to the tenant, like, hey, this house should be rented for 850 right now, but you're at 550. We're going to increase you to 650 for next year. So Ryan and I kind of capped it at $100 a month, or $100 increase per month, just out of the kindness of our hearts. I mean, we could do more, but as far as a percent goes, that $100 for a $550 rent could be like a 20-some% increase.
So
So
he modified it now, saying assuming market rent year over year.
Oh, I mean, so I'll give you Jacksonville for an example. My wife and I bought a house here 4 years ago. Market rent would have been $1,300 a month. Now we could rent out that exact same house for $2,000. So I think it depends on market conditions. I don't think there's a set number you could put. But if you're starting out at market rent, then yeah, I don't know. I'd be hesitant to put a number on it, but I think you should look at what other places are renting out for of similar size and area to
Yeah.
your house.
He's in Dayton.
Yeah. So, I mean, a 10% increase could be reasonable. A 5% might be reasonable. Could be 15.
I think we're trying to at least raise our rents by like what would the minimum be, like 20 bucks, $20 a month, $25.
Yeah, I mean, right now rents have gone up so much recently that it could be more like 50.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
Yeah, some places that we rented out a year ago for 900, the comparables would be at 1,000 right now.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. All right. Well, look at that, Will. The people want you back.
Nice. Appreciate it, 17th
Awesome.
Love.
All right. Well, I sure do appreciate it. Next Friday, 8 a.m. Eastern Standard. I'll see you right here. And in the meantime, feel free to watch and share all the new videos coming out.
Yep.
All righty. See you guys next week.
All right. Have a good one.